Hi friends, and thanks so much for being here today. Today I want to share with you a technique I've used to create some of my all-time favorite cards that I've ever made. It's a spritzing technique that gives you the look of creating watercolor cards without the mess or really the work of creating watercolor. I'm going to be using flower stamps. If you love flower stamps and if you love the look of watercolor, I think you're going to love today's technique. Let's take a look at it. The stamp set I'm using today is called True Beauty, and I just love this stamp set because it already has that naturalistic watercolor beautiful look on its own, even if I just stamp it without the technique we're going to use today. But with the addition of the spritzing that we're going to do, it just gives it really stunning results. So I'm going to bring in, I've got my grid paper here on the left. I am stamping onto shimmery white cardstock today. You can use regular white cardstock, but anytime I'm using water, I really, a lot of times, like to use this shimmery white cardstock. I have my spritzer that I've filled with water, and I do keep this one marked with a W on both the cap and on the bottom. That way I can keep this one filled with water separate from the one that I keep filled with rubbing alcohol that I also use for different techniques. So I'm going to ink up my stamp with soft succulent ink. I'm going to stamp the leaves first, and then I put this grid paper here so that I could lay the stamp upside down. And I am going to spritz water directly onto the inked stamp. Now, how many spritzes of water you use may depend on your preference. It may depend on the stamp set. I am going to try using two spritzes here and stamp those leaves. Then I'm repeating with the flower stamp and some rich raspberry ink. Now, I also spritz twice on it. And what I found was, you may see I get a little bit of splattering here when I lift up that stamp. I got a few little rich raspberry splatters. Now, I don't mind that on this card because I'm creating that watercolor look, but I may use less spritzing on some of the stamps as a result of that. So this card right here is just super quick, super easy, but you get a little bit of a stepped up look because of that watercolor feel. For my second card, I'm actually going to start by stamping the greeting. The reason for this is sometimes if I create a flower cluster and wait and add that greeting afterwards, I run out of the space where I wanted to have that greeting. So I'm stamping my greeting first here and I'm working around it. Next, I'm going to stamp some of the roses. I'm using Orchid Oasis ink, and for this rose, I'm only spritzing one time. The reason for that is the rose has a little bit more solid surface area on it than some of these other stamps. And the more solid your stamp is, the less water you're going to be able to add to it without it creating a really messy look. So I'm starting with roses and I'm going to build that cluster of flowers. After I add a couple of roses, I'll start working on the leaves. And then I will add the leaves and the roses in the order that just seems to make sense to me as I am creating this card. So all this is a few roses, a few leaves, and then I finished it off with a twine bow and a few gems, and I thought this card came together really beautifully. For my third card, I decided to go with the dimensions of a slimline card because I just love these larger cards and the extra impact they have on when someone opens them. So I started with all of my ink colors spread out around, and a lot of times when I'm using several ink colors like this, I like to leave the stamp that I'm using with each one laying on top so that I don't get them mixed up. Ink colors I'm using here are Fresh Freesia, Pale Papaya, Gorgeous Grape, Crumb Cake, Granny Apple Green, and Pear Pizzazz. So I like to start these flower clusters with the largest part that is going to be more of the focal point. So in this example, it's those large purple flowers on the long stems. So I started with those and then I started to build around those. Now, as I create this, I don't want to cover the entire card front. I think that would be too busy. You could do that and actually it would be beautiful, but for what I'm doing, I want to leave some open space. So I start by filling in the bottom left portion of the card. Now on all of these, I was inking my stamp, spritzing. For the most part, I was spritzing one time. Sometimes I spritz twice, and then I stamp on the card. After I stamp on the card, I want to clean that water off of my stamp before I put the stamp back on my ink pad. So I ink my stamp, I spritz it, I stamp on the card, I stamp once or twice onto my scrap paper to get that extra water off, and then I set it back on the ink pad to keep them with the right color so that I don't get them mixed up. So I keep stamping until I have filled up that bottom left area, and then I stamped some on the right side as well, came around, filled in a little bit on the top area, and left some of that open space. I wanted to add a few special touches to this card, so I started by embossing just the edges of the left and the right sides. I used the gingham embossing folder, and this is a technique you can use if you're doing a slimline card or a large card that's larger than the embossing folder you want to use. So I placed one end into the embossing folder, I cranked it part way through my machine, and then I backed it out. What this does is it gives it a soft edge instead of a hard edge and leaving a line where you stop embossing it. Just gives it a nice soft edge. It fades in and it fades out, and it looks natural on your card. I repeated that with the other side, and after that I did a little bit of blending with my blending brushes and some crumb cake ink. I like how this ages the edges of the card and makes it look a little bit vintage. Next, I thought the card needed something. It needed some texture or something all the way across it. So I used a stencil from the Artistic Mix Decorative Mask set. I laid that over half of the card. I put just scrap paper over the other half because I didn't want to get any color onto that part. I used a spritzer with water and a little bit of soft suede ink mixed in and spritzed a couple of times to add a little bit of color. Then I switched the mask to the other side and covered up the first half with my scrap paper, spritzed a few more times. Then I finished it off with the little greeting and a few gems and added it to a white card base. This card measures, the card base measures 7 inches by 8.5. I scored it in half at the 3.5 inch mark. And the piece for the top that it did my stamping on, it measures 3 3/8 by 8 3/8. I hope you enjoyed seeing these cards today with this spritzing technique that achieves a watercolor effect. It's a beautiful technique for flower stamps, and you can use it for a lot of other stamps as well. If you're interested in any of the products I used today, you can find more information and order using the links in the video description below. Please like, subscribe, give me a comment down below. Let me know what you'd like to see in future videos. I hope you have a blessed day, and I hope you'll be back again next time when I'll be here helping you to hand make with love.